One thing I definitely do see people doing is then in a year and a half, 2 years, when that drive starts filling up, they just unplug that drive and stick it in a cabinet and never look at it again and say, oh, I know that's backed up. If I ever need to, I can go back to it. That drive is not going to last that long. You don't want to realize that your half your photography career of all of those awesome images that you've taken, you just can't find one day. That's why it's important to just always put them in the same two places every single time. And that way you also don't end up with a situation that I've seen a ton of photographers in. They were trying to back up constantly. They've got like 4 copies of their files on OneDrive sometime, but never knew where anything was backed up.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. I'm your host, Raymond Hadfield, and today we are chatting with data storage expert Will Yarborough about how to tackle your data storage needs, how to know how much storage space you actually need, how to ensure that your photos are actually safe, and how to know when to upgrade, and so much more. This episode is brought to you by CloudSpot, the all-in-one and way better than Google Drive solution to deliver and even sell your photos online. You can grab your free forever CloudSpot account with 10 gigabytes of photo storage for free over at deliverphotos.com. Now, as many of you may know, I've been a long-time supporter of Drobo. Drobo was a company that made amazing storage solutions that I thought were just perfect for photographers. Well, the company went belly up not long ago, and unfortunately my Drobo unit died shortly after that. That left me looking for a replacement, and you would not believe it, but there really aren't that many good and simple options to replace the Drobo. So I had to look for other solutions, and that's when I found our guest today, Will, who goes by the name Space Rex on YouTube. I'd like to think that I'm a pretty smart guy when it comes to storage needs and security. I've been doing it for a while for myself personally, but I was facing such a huge learning curve transitioning from Drobo to Synology, which is what I ultimately ended up going with. And Will's videos on YouTube made learning about the Synology ecosystem and just the whole process so much easier. It helped out so much. So I invited Will on today to talk with you about the world of storage, hard drives versus SSDs, keeping your photos safe, what we need as a bare minimum, and how to look to the future and anticipate what your storage needs could be. In this interview, we do get technical. So if you're having a hard time keeping up, it's not you. It is the world of data management that can be overwhelming. So I encourage you to try to hang on and keep listening, because if you do, I know that it will help you out so much. Also, this is the last interview of the year on purpose. Now that it is the time when shoots slow down and you're not going out as much on your own, this is the perfect time to reassess what you're doing and prepare for when winter is over and you are out shooting again. And that is why I took the info that Will shares with us today, and I created something I think is pretty special to help you take action and secure your photos. So stick around to the end of the interview where I'm going to tell you more about it. So with that, let's go ahead and get on into today's podcast interview with Will Yarborough. The first question that I have for you, Will, is, well, typically it's when did you know that photography was going to play an important role in your life? But I want to know, when did you know that data was going to play an important role in your life?
Okay, so I'm at a weird place in life where I was an engineer. I went to college for engineering. I was a mechanical engineer, got a job as a mechanical engineer, doing everything I loved. And then I just kind of one day was like, I want to learn how to make videos. I want to learn how to do video production. What do I know? What can I make a tutorial on? And I settled on data storage essentially. And it was just one of those things where it's like, yeah, on my weekends, my girlfriend at the time, is now my wife, was still living in Raleigh, finishing up her last year of college. And so it's just like I had a lot of free time. I'm like, well, let's do that. And then it just kind of slowly snowballed to where people were like, hey, you clearly know what you're doing. Can I just hire you? I was like, I guess, sure. And it's just like the past 2 years is probably when I'd say is, okay, yeah, I'm now like a data storage expert, if that's even a thing.
That is so funny. It's always strange. So I always love asking this question specifically for photographers who go to school for something else. So I actually just interviewed somebody who I believe also a mechanical engineer. She worked on bridges and stuff. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how do you make that decision to now leave this thing that essentially you went to school to learn, to pursue this, in your case, a more creative path?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it was kind of a path least resistance kind of thing. I was fortunate enough to, it was something I was just able to do on the side. And then I was really lucky. I was in a really good position with my old job where I had a lot of leeway where I could kind of do whatever I wanted. They just knew I was going to get my work done as long as I got my hours in. That was really all that I had to do. And I was pretty much my own boss. Kind of, it's a very strange situation. And like I told him, I actually gave my new boss his second day on the job an 8 month notice that I was going to be quitting.
An 8 month notice. Is that a
It,
common thing in your position?
I was in a weird place where I just kind of had like, because of a lot of management changes and stuff, I was in charge myself and building this program that I spent 2 years developing and writing code for and doing a full analysis on. It's like, if I leave now, I absolutely know that will go away and nobody will have a clue what I did. And I was lucky enough where it's like, I've got goodwill. I may as well just tell them. And that was just kind of it. So it was a funny thing where like, I would leave work to go do other work sometimes and be like, yep, sorry, I'll clock back in later.
Oh, that's
But
hilarious.
and then yeah, it just really came down to it. I think it was actually last December, so not even a year ago now, where my wife and I were driving up to Asheville, which is where my parents are. We're like, we should just quit and do this full time already. Like, and we ended up like on a kind of a rash decision. 3 months later, quit our job, sold our house, and moved back up to Raleigh, North Carolina from Huntsville, Alabama.
Oh my gosh. That is terrifying. What did your parents think?
Oh, my parents, like my dad has no clue what I do. He just no clue what servers are, storage is at all. Stresses him out. I get phone calls. He doesn't understand Wi-Fi. Like that is the level where it's like
Yeah.
he gets cell phone coverage because it works, but trying to get him on Wi-Fi, it's a conversation. So he's like trying to be supportive, but you can tell he is super worried about it because I had a great job before. He's like, it's such a great job. You can like tell that internal side of things. But no, I was like, guys, y'all always told me to be my own boss and get my own company. They're like, and I actually do it. Now you're like, you're not going to make it. I'm like, really?
So they obviously just didn't understand the subject matter. They still had faith in you, just they didn't understand what it was that you were doing.
They did not. It was just like, they were like being supportive, but at the same time, you could just tell they were super stressed about
Oh
it.
man. Oh man. Yeah, that's typically what I hear from others is that the parents are just like, we want to support you and we hope that this is the best, but good luck, we don't understand it. And well, I'm
Yeah.
glad that you went off and you did it because honestly, and I've shared this story on the podcast before, I as a wedding photographer, as you can imagine, come up with a lot of images, right?
Mhm.
Over years, they start to build up. So a long time ago, I invested in a Drobo. Loved every minute of it until they went out of business, and then I had upgraded my computer, and there's no sort of compatibility. You know what I did? I kept my old iMac, and
Yep.
then just did a Thunderbolt bridge to my computer so that I could access my Drobo. And I was like, this is ridiculous. Like I bought a laptop so that I could be portable with this thing and it wasn't working out. And then after the second time it died, I replaced it. I had to buy one from somebody else because you
Yeah.
can't buy them
eBay. Yep.
news. Yeah. This was Facebook Marketplace. And luckily a listener hooked me up with a link from somebody local to him and he was able to send it to me. But that one just died. So I had to look into a different solution. And then that's when I started to find Synology stuff. And that is how I found you. So I'm so glad that you did not listen to your parents and stick to your job because out of all of the universe of people who talk about data and specifically network attached storage and Synology online, I feel like you do a wonderful job at explaining it in a way that is easy enough to understand, but clearly with experience. It's not like you set one up and now you're making YouTube content about how you did it, but like you're doing this a lot and you're helping others. And on top of that, you also are knowledgeable about photography. So tell me a little bit about your photography background as well.
Yeah. So funny enough, like photography is actually how I got my first NAS. Like I was in the exact same boat as you. I had a external hard drive that was kind of starting to fill up, and it's like, man, this got to be a better way. Like, and I ended up finding a company called Synology NAS online. I was like, okay, I had no clue what a NAS was. Like at the time, I was like, I guess it's kind of like an external hard drive, but its own thing. And it just led me down the rabbit hole of just somehow now this is my full-time job. I started, my grandmother was always kind of like the family photographer, and I always enjoyed it in like middle school and stuff. But it was really like I went to Italy my senior year of high school. And I was like, I wish I had a camera. You just see all these gorgeous scenes and everything. It's like, I really wish I had a camera that was better than just my smartphone. And after that, I was like, I'm going to get a DSLR. And I got a Canon. Oh, I think it was like a T6 or a T5 or T6. And it was the one just like one generation behind the other one. It's like, all right, I'm going to start doing it. And that's where I kind of really, I enjoyed the almost like the math aspect of it, where
Mm-hmm.
you just calculate exposure. It's just logarithmic equations and it's just calculating exposure on how everything works. And that I ended up really enjoying that side of things and almost the science of it more so than necessarily the creative side of it.
Yeah.
It was just like you do this, and this, and you get the image. I've always found that fascinating.
No, I agree. And I feel a similar way as well when I had learned exposure. Because for me, it was always taught as you can use whatever you want. And I'm like, okay, great, but like, where do we start? And so to know how a light meter works and to know like what a quote unquote proper exposure is and then how you can adjust it from there really got me excited to see stops and how you just double or you half and then the amount of light changes is really exciting stuff. So what sorts of things were you photographing at the time? This was just your life?
Yeah, so it was a lot of in high school. I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, which was super useful. It's gorgeous in the Blue Ridge Mountains. I was like 5 miles from great hiking trails and stuff. So it's just like go up there and do a lot of landscapes and stuff. And then in college, I did a lot of senior photos and that kind of side of things. But I think what I've always really enjoyed was like the landscape side of things, where you can really kind of get everything set up perfectly and just really kind of take a shot, figure out what you do and don't like about it, and try again, all with the same subject, not really moving or anything, and kind of getting that kind of precision down that I've always really enjoyed.
Of course. Yeah. I think that's something that a lot of new photographers enjoy about it as well. Because when you're photographing a kid, I mean, just constant movement, it can be hard to learn your camera when everything is changing, when more than one
Yeah.
aspect is changing for sure. So you said that you're taking these photos, you're realizing, oh my gosh, all these hard drives are filling up. Is that how you started? Were you just buying multiple different hard drives?
I got one 5 terabyte hard drive, and then I realized that it's like, oh, there's no way that like, how do I manage this? Right? It's only plugged into this one device. There's got to be a better way. And then I start researching, and I just am like, oh, there's a thing called a NAS. I had no concept of what that was beforehand. Like I would have just called that a server beforehand, but it's a specific type of server that just allows you to store files. And then there does all of these other things, and it went down the deep rabbit hole of just finding out every little thing you can do on it.
Now, one reason why I wanted to bring you on today is because from where I'm at, it doesn't make sense to have multiple different hard drives. From where somebody brand new to photography is at, maybe it does. I don't know. So I thought I want to chat with you to kind of figure out maybe what is a roadmap to upgrade our data solutions because you just don't know when you need to do it. And a lot of listeners right now think to themselves, I have 4 external hard drives on my desk and I have to plug in each one and try to find the photo. And if that's not it, unplug it, plug in a new one. And it's a huge thing. But some people are just getting started and maybe their computer is enough. So does that sound good to you? Does that sound like something that we can
That
do?
sounds, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So trying to break it down in my head, when it comes to photographers, there's 3 or 4 different steps to where they're at, right? So let's start off with those. I mean, brand new to photography. Maybe they've been doing it between 0, 6 months. You've been there. What do your storage needs look like at that point?
That is one of those places where it's like I've seen a lot of sides of it where there's that person who has, oh, my camera can do 20 frames per second. We're doing 20 frames per second all the time.
Of course.
But for your normal person, honestly, a laptop just works. Like just keep enough storage on your laptop and call your raw files. Like that's the biggest thing to do, is just not feel like you have to keep every little thing, because so many people I know keep everything. And I'm talking everything, their focus tests, all these things where it's like, all right. And then you almost water down the experience because you're looking through your catalog and you just see so many images you just do not care about. And it's hard to find the stuff you like, honestly.
Mm.
So to me, it's just like get a laptop. And the biggest thing is just making sure that your files are backed up in some way that makes sense to you. I think honestly, for most people, Backblaze, they've got a subscription that's $7 a month, and you get your entire laptop and any other external hard drives backed up for that. And it's just easy. It's one of those things you set, you do it, and you can kind of forget. And then you just know if anything, if your laptop crashes, you've got that ability to go back.
I will admit I have forgotten about Backblaze before, and it wasn't until a month after. Oh, it was right after my Drobo died. Well, it was 30 days after the Drobo died when Backblaze was like, "Hey, you're getting close," and I was like, "Oh yeah, that's right, I got Backblaze." And so yeah, I can attest to how easy that can be. But I want to go back to what you had said earlier about just using your laptop. Laptop works great just in the beginning. You said just make sure that you have enough storage. How do we know what is enough storage?
And that's the biggest thing. It really comes down to what kind of photographer are you? Are you the family photographer who you're just going to keep the JPEGs out of camera because you're really about documenting your family's history and not having to pull every single shadow perfectly? If you're just keeping the processed JPEGs or even the out of camera JPEGs, I mean, 500 gigabytes for Windows or Mac will be enough for a long time. Where you really start getting is where you've got these massive raw files and all these cameras. They're not only getting way faster frames per second, but the file sizes are also getting so much bigger,
Mm-hmm.
and not only in megapixels, but also in dynamic range. And that just keeps taking up more and more space to hold all of that data. And so that's where, if you're somebody who really wants to be able to store everything and never lose a file or anything like that, that's where, I mean, 2 terabytes is probably a good place to start for a lot of that. And that is where you're going to be really simple because you're all in one place. You don't have to worry about where your files are. They're just always in your backpack. But then after that, after you start either paying a lot of money for laptop storage, or you have to go to other solutions, which can get really complicated quick.
Okay, gotcha. So let's say that somebody's listening a year or two in the future. A good place to start. If you had a computer with 2 terabytes, you're good to get started. You got no worries as far as storage goes.
Yeah, absolutely. That's just a easy place where, I mean, you're going to be able to shoot for, unless you're somebody just holding on to every single image and taking thousands of images per day,
Yeah.
you're going to be good for a very long time. And I work with some professional photographers who delete raw files after 3 months.
Hmm.
They're like, I don't need them. I've done my edit. I'm going to keep the processed like TIFF, and that's it. That is really all they're going to do is keep that. I'm like, how?
At one point, it's do you keep everything or do you only keep the few that you deliver? Yeah, that's a balance for sure. And for context, I guess to help out for anybody listening, when I would shoot weddings, I mean, I'd go for probably 8 hours, obviously shooting raw. I would come home with about 120 gigs of images. So what? Doing the math, that's like eight, almost 10 weddings worth of storage for 2 terabytes. So if you're not shooting weddings, that should last you quite a while. So that's great. That's great. Now you mentioned Backblaze as well. I guess obviously I have Backblaze, so it made sense to me. For those listening who don't have it or don't know what it is, can you explain that a little further?
Yeah, Backblaze, it's just one of those companies that's actually like, I like what they do on the internet. They're just like kind of, they release all their data. So they are a backup company. That's kind of their first through and through. That's what they do is they provide easy ways to back up computers at low flat rates where there's not a lot of services out there where you can still get truly unlimited storage. Like with that Drobo you had, you were able to get 100 terabytes
Yeah.
into your Backblaze account. And they were definitely taking a loss on you because $7 a month does not cover 100 terabytes of
No.
space, especially once you have geo redundancy on there. And they're just one of those companies, they like publish every year their hard drive statistics on, hey, how long did it take for hard drives to fail? And just all that kind of stuff where it's one of those companies that does fun stuff like that and has an easy backup solution for just, you just kind of set it, back up your entire computer to the cloud. If you need to grab a file, you just download it from the cloud.
Perfect. One of the misconceptions, and maybe you can clear this up. I know a lot of people, when they think, oh, my hard drive is starting to get full, I need an external hard drive. Is that where we go to next between the 6 and 24-month phase?
So that it comes down to who you are is the biggest piece. For people who are honestly not computer people, absolutely. Get I don't know, they sell 22 terabyte external drives like that you plug them into power. They honestly just kind of work. It's like your Drobo. You don't have to change your workflow at all. If you're using Lightroom, just make sure to keep your like catalog file on your local computer, and then the actual raw files you can just copy over there. Everything's solid, and it just keeps your life easy. I absolutely love a NAS, but at the same time, if you're not really like computers are not your forte, especially if you've only got a small amount of data, but enough where it doesn't necessarily fit on a laptop anymore, but you still can fit it on a hard drive. staying into that external hard drive is just great. But the problem then comes down to how do you want to back it up? And what do you care about for your images? For most people, I kind of tell them always make sure you know where every single JPEG you've ever exported is. Because to me, if I'm exporting a JPEG, that means I liked it. That means that I processed it. I, for whatever reason, liked it. And making sure that those files are wherever you need them is crucial. Because for me, I would love to keep all my raw files from 2015. But if I lost them, I've not gone back to them in such a long time. But if I lost all my exported images, all my family gatherings, and all my times I've gone on trips and everything like that, that's what would crush me. It's having those truly good images that you actually liked and exported is the most important thing, where you should always know exactly where they are. They should always be in at least two places.
That's a great way to look at it there. So when we say that it should be at least two places, so I guess the disconnect that I see is when people buy an external drive and then rather than saving things onto their computer, they start saving it on the drive and saying, great, now I'm backed up because it's on an external drive. Is that the case?
External drives, anytime you get one, just expect them to fail. Quite like there's a reason why oftentimes these hard drives in a case with everything, they're actually cheaper than internal computer hard drives, even though in here there's an internal computer hard drive. Basically, they take the cheapest, like the drives that did not necessarily pass all of QC, and ones that, hey, maybe the drive itself did not fail, but that batch had 10% more failures than they're used to. So like, we can't really sell them as internal drives, but we'll sell them in this. That's where you should expect them to fail. Just genuinely, whenever you're thinking about it, just expect an external hard drive to fail. Actually, expect any hard drive to fail. SSDs do tend to be a lot better. SSDs can last a lot longer and do tend to be much more durable. There's no moving parts in them. They don't wear out in the same way. They tend to have a very, very, very long life, especially from a photographer standpoint.
So you had mentioned make sure that all your JPEGs are in two places. What does that mean?
So for me, I really prefer people having them in, ideally, every time you say export something, just get in the habit of export it to the exact same folder on your computer. And I think on your computer, just because that's the place where it's always hooked up. You always have them. That way, if you're out with somebody and you've got your computer, oh, you can pull up all those things. Then there's so many different options for how you can get them to be backed up as well. For JPEGs, two is really the minimum in my experience, just because they're so cheap. A processed JPEG is like 500 kilobytes. It is just so small. You can store thousands of them, and they're the best you've got. So I tend to tell people, if you've got Windows, put them on iCloud or put them on OneDrive. If you've got Mac OS, put them on iCloud Drive. Just be able to have those in addition to all the other things, just because that's the stuff you want to make sure, no matter what happens, you have access to.
So when we go to export a photo, we export it one onto our computer and then two onto either an external drive, an iCloud account if we're on a Mac, or say OneDrive if we're on a PC. That seems like a lot of extra steps. Why are we doing this? What's the point of putting this in two places?
The beauty of that is you just want to know that anything can happen and you've got your photos. That's the biggest thing, is just get in the habit of just always doing that. And then it's basically all, you always know where everything is. One thing I definitely do see people doing is then in a year and a half, 2 years, when that drive starts filling up, they just unplug that drive and stick it in a cabinet and never look at it again and say, oh, I know that's backed up. If I ever need to, I can go back to it. And that's one of those fallacies where it's like, all right, that drive is not going to last that long. So that's why it's important to just really have that redundancy, because you don't want to realize that half your photography career of all of those awesome images that you've taken, you just can't find one day. That's why it's important to just always put them in the same two places every single time. And that way you also don't end up with a situation that I've seen a ton of photographers in, who are on the opposite end of the scale, who back up everything always constantly, but in different ways, where it's like their E drive is backed up to their F drive, and then it's also backed up to their G drive, because they've got like 4 copies of their files on one drive sometime, just because they were trying to back up constantly, but never knew where anything was backed up.
I see. Okay. So we're trying to just avoid any sort of issue as far as a hard drive failing or losing a computer or anything like that, because now if it's either on an external drive or a cloud storage, say something does happen to our computer where we do export and access our photos, if something happens to that computer, we're still able to get access to our JPEGs in these other locations.
Exactly. Yeah. This is kind of one of those bare minimums too. Obviously, it's great to back everything completely up that you own, but really making sure to think about the key stuff that is like, I am in so much trouble. I am going to feel horrible if I lose these things
Mm.
is kind of what I try to tell people. Because if you go about the approach of like for a business, it's what's called a 3-2-1 backup solution. 3 total copies of your data across 2 different mediums and one of them offsite. It's just one of those things where it's not reasonable for so many people to do that. And you feel like if you don't do that, it's not worth backing up at all. It's just like one of those things where make sure you just know what's important in your life. Make sure you know that stuff that's really, really, really critical. You know that you've got true, easy ways of accessing those no matter what happens.
Okay. Okay. So we talk about Backblaze for the, having just your internal drive on your computer and then having that backed up to Backblaze as really like that's how you get started. That's the easiest way to get started.
And Backblaze will also work with an external drive. I mean, as you said, your Drobo, they will do that too, which is just for a perfect solution. Backblaze is not like this ironclad thing, but it is such an easy way of getting started
Mhm.
and getting everything going that it's just so easy to recommend for that.
Right, of course. Yeah, especially for the amount of storage it is. Truly bananas. So we had talked about exporting JPEGs onto your internal drive as well as, say, a cloud drive. If you're, say, between, I don't know, 6 and 24 months as your storage needs grow, are we still using Backblaze as well?
I would keep using Backblaze up until the point where you start getting a NAS is probably what I would do for most people, just because they've got that easy to use one flat rate where, I mean, it's if you do a cost benefit analysis, it's hard to beat that with anything else. And it's so easy to set up. One other thing to do is every 6 months, just put it on your calendar or however you track stuff. Just go into Backblaze, grab that one image that you took 3 days ago and just download it. Make sure that you can find that image in Backblaze. Make sure to test your backup because that way you know, oh, hey, my photos are actually getting backed up. I just downloaded the image from 2 days ago. That's one thing that so many people do is they say, oh, yeah, I've got a backup. They've not opened it in 2 years. I think the line is a untested backup is wishful thinking.
Oh man. Oh, an untested backup is wishful thinking. That is terrifying to me to think about. Wow. Because there are so many times, especially as photographers, there's such a wide range of things that you could shoot from obviously client work, which would be devastating to lose because if they lose it, you're kind of responsible for that. But also your own personal family and like your own life and those things. And losing that is just devastating. So before we move on kind of to that next point, we covered the 0 to 6, we covered kind of 6 to 24. Can we talk about cost for a moment? Because if we're not shooting professionally and we're just doing all this stuff for our own, for our family, is an external drive and Backblaze enough? Is that enough for us? Because I mean, that seems like a relatively easy cost.
Yeah, I mean, especially with photography, it's a hobby that you can put as much money as you'd like to in there.
Yes.
It is truly where you can be incredibly lean with it. You can keep your single lens and your camera, and honestly, it's going to take every single image you ever needed it to. Same thing with that external hard drive. In all honesty, if you were somebody who is good about making sure you keep your raw files that you actually liked, and then all the other shots that you didn't want to export and you didn't like, maybe delete those raw files. You can absolutely continue on forever with that and just making sure you've got the images you really care about. I mean, 10 years ago, a 12 terabyte hard drive was a large hard drive. Now you can get a 22 terabyte hard drive. It's not the same that it was 15, 20 years ago, where it's like doubling every couple of years, but it is absolutely the case by the time that those cameras are having larger sensors with more megapixels and larger file sizes. By the time you're ready to upgrade that drive, well, now also the drives are also having so much more space.
Yeah, I think that's what's hard for a lot of people to make a decision because there is that decision of, well, I could buy a large enough hard drive today to where I don't really have to think about it for years, right? Like, I'm not going to shoot 20 terabytes worth of images in the next few years, but I could buy that drive if I wanted to. Or I could, say, buy a 4 terabyte SSD, knowing that it'll be faster, probably the same price as that 20 terabyte drive, but also more reliable. So can you kind of break down what the difference is between, say, an internal hard drive, an SSD, and how we make that choice?
Oh, I mean, your SSD versus a hard drive is just such a big difference. Like it is remarkable how much you can feel. Like most computers now all have SSDs internally, but now you can take a really old computer from 2014, you open it up and you log in and it feels horribly slow. It's probably got a hard drive in there. There are people who just take those, throw in a SSD that's like $100, and it is a brand new computer. It is just a truly different level of experience between a hard drive and an SSD. Just specifically for things like editing and grabbing random files, it is remarkable. Definitely always keep your Lightroom catalog on an SSD because it is just hundreds of times faster to load, open, and show you previews.
So it's speed, it sounds like. What's the physical difference?
It's huge. I think I actually got props here.
Sweet. I'm going to have to share this bit in the community here.
Yeah, so I am one of those people who I've gone through all of the different levels of SSD that you can
It's like the size of a
have.
credit card right there. It's tiny.
It's remarkable. I mean, it is. You can buy massive SSDs now as well, and they are just so easy. You don't have to worry about one of the biggest things is if you do have a hard drive. There's two different types of hard drive, external hard drives: 3.5-inch ones and 2.5-inch ones. Your 3.5-inch ones generally have to be plugged into a wall outlet, which is generally not great for photographers. You want to be able to kind of edit on the road, depending on what your workflow is. And then there's the 2.5-inch ones that don't have quite as much capacity, but generally can be powered off of your computer. So that means you just plug it in via USB or USB-C, and it's just off to the races. But one thing that you really cannot do is don't ever open that hard drive on something like an airplane, because there are spinning disks in there that are going at 7,200 RPM per second, or per minute, I guess. And those vibrations can completely shred the disk.
I never thought about that. Using a hard drive on a plane, I never even considered that. So it's the movement of the plane?
Yeah, it's the oscillation. There's so much moment of inertia going on with the spinning disks that if you tilt it, then all of a sudden they're now hitting the sensor arm that actually is reading the actual magnetic strip that's telling you a 1 or a 0 that's saying what your photo is. If you're tilting it too much as it's spinning, they will make contact and it's just going to shred the hard drive essentially.
Holy cow. Just to provide a mental visual for people who are listening right now. So what's inside of like an internal hard drive, like an old school or like an external hard drive that you'd have on your desktop? It's like a CD inside that's spinning around constantly and it holds all that data.
Yeah, there's about 12 of them, normally all stacked on top of each other with little arms that go out, kind of like a sprinkler system almost, that jet in and out really quickly.
Gotcha.
And they actually have these little heads that are just nanometers over the actual spinning disk, just to read them. The closer they are, the more accurate they are, and the smaller everything would be. And that is just where vibrations, especially something like a huge oscillation like a plane can do, can really mess those up. I've had that before with a CD. I remember with my Xbox, I didn't realize that I tilted it from 90 degrees to 180 degrees and it shredded the drive in there. I was like, oh, I just paid $60 for that game back when I was young. And it's absolutely something that can happen. And that's the biggest difference between a mechanical hard drive and a all electric SSD is there's just no moving parts in an SSD. So they are so much harder to break. They're so much more rugged. You can, I mean, don't do this, but you can throw them around and just not worry about it. Completely unlike a hard drive.
Right. Okay. So a hard drive is more like a CD, whereas like a SSD is more like a memory card that we put into our computer or into our cameras. Okay. So no moving parts, and that just makes it safer to travel with because it's more rugged. Okay, so that makes sense. So how do you, because I see that you had that external hard drive right there and you also have SSDs. How do you decide which one you need to pick?
So I'll be honest with you. The hard drive is coming further and further out of fashion in a sense for things, just because SSDs recently have just gotten so much cheaper, especially in the last 2 years. It is remarkable. I mean, on Amazon, you can get a 4 terabyte SSD for something like $220.
Mm.
And it is remarkable how much cheaper they've become. And there's a lot of real advantages to SSDs. A lot of photographers I do know, especially older ones who were kind of getting into computers and getting into editing in like the early like 2010s, are very worried about a thing where SSDs will burn out. So that's probably one of the biggest worries that people have is every SSD, it's different than a hard drive. Every time you write data to it, you're shrinking the lifespan of it every single time.
Mm.
The way they work is there's only so many times that the drive can be written to before it just can't be written to anymore. And it goes into a read-only state. That used to be a really big deal, especially in the early 2010s, kind of around that time. It's not nearly as big of a deal now. Now, most cheap SSDs you can find online can be written to completely. If it's 2 terabyte SSD, you can dump a 2 terabyte file to it every day for 5 years and still not burn it out.
Oh, wow.
So it's not nearly the deal it used to be, but that was a very big issue back in the day that made a lot of people stay away from the SSDs. I'd say it's hard to, unless you really need that massive amount of space. That's the only reason why you would go with a hard drive rather than SSD, because for prices, there's not a huge difference, especially if you're talking the 2 to 4 terabyte range. There's really not that big of a difference.
Okay, I gotcha. So if we're just doing personal photography or we're just getting started, try to get an SSD because that's going to last the longest. It's going to be the most reliable and it's going to be faster, as you said, much faster than say an external hard drive. And when I say external hard drive, I'm talking like the ones that looks like a VHS, like tape, not the ones that look like a credit card or something smaller like that. All right, great. So we got that figured out. And now if an SSD does fail, I guess it's great because we still have Backblaze to hopefully keep us safe.
Absolutely.
Okay, so now let's talk about those photographers who maybe they're shooting 24 plus months. So at this point, they were interested in photography, they got into it, they realized, oh, this is more than just an interesting thing that I'm doing at the moment, but this really means a lot to me. I'm going to keep going with this. They're amassing files. Now they're working for clients, multiple projects, lots and lots of data. Is the answer just to keep buying more external drives, or what's next?
So my biggest thing is as soon as you realize, oh, not everything I have can fit on one drive, that is where you can either go down the path that I really do not recommend, where you've got a shoebox full of hard drives with labels on them from different years. And that's the time where it's really worth it to invest in a NAS. It makes your life a lot more complicated in the sense where it goes from being super simple, plug it in, it just kind of works. But the benefit of it is everything you own is in one place. It's all backed up. It handles itself. They have a thing called RAID where one of the drives can fail and it just keeps going without really having to shut down or anything, and just put in a new drive and it rebuilds itself, all while your data is still fully accessible and you can keep going like nothing ever happened. They can back themselves up, and they start having other applications where now they start managing your photos. Now they can make themselves into a Google Drive essentially, and you can really start to go and bring out more than just a external hard drive.
Okay, so before we move forward, I know that there's people listening right now saying, I know he keeps saying the word NAS, but what does that mean?
So NAS is network attached storage. And it is, if you've ever worked at a company that had a office file server where there was the S drive at the office where you clicked on it and you could see the files everybody else was working on and everybody shares there, that is what a NAS is. It's basically a hard drive hooked up to another computer that you talk to it over Wi-Fi or wired Ethernet.
Okay, gotcha. Essentially, it is the most kind of external hard drive because it's not connected directly to your computer. I guess it could be, but a NAS is typically, most people access them, say, over Wi-Fi. Is that right? Like in their own home?
Yeah, so it comes down to the biggest thing is you access it at however your network speed is. So it's like accessing it over Wi-Fi is like accessing it over, well, USB 2, somewhere around there.
Slow.
And then, yeah, it's you definitely start to feel it. But for certain things like just previewing your images, it's not bad. And I actually use it to edit my YouTube videos, and I'll go hang out outside on the back porch and it can edit off of Wi-Fi if I'm using proxy. There is that nice flexibility. But for the most part, when you're really editing and really importing your massive catalogs, you really want to be wired Ethernet. So you just plug a standard Ethernet cable into your computer and you just plug that into the Wi-Fi router you've got that's also plugged in the NAS. And now your computer talks to it over that wired Ethernet cable.
This may be a dumb question, but why are we adding all of this complexity to how we connect to this? How is this better than just having 3 or 4 external hard drives? What's the difference here?
Because now it's just one big storage target that can handle everything. That's the real advantage to it, is you can start accessing it wherever you are in the world. So now you've got your Lightroom catalog on your internal laptop hard drive, and you're in Paris, and you get a phone call from a client who says, hey, I really need a black and white version of that one file you sent me 8 months ago. You've got access to your entire catalog wherever you are in the world. You can easily just VPN on in, just connect to it, and boom, you can export that full quality raw file exactly how it was. It's that true flexibility that is one of those things. It takes a lot of work to get there. It's not as easy as just a simple SSD plugging into your computer, but it allows you to do so much more because it's a computer itself. It can handle all these things, and it's designed to give you access to your files wherever you are in the world.
I gotta say, if a client called me while I was in Paris asking for a black and white photo, I would immediately hang up the phone. I'd be like, "What are you doing calling me right now? This is ridiculous. I'm not dealing with this right now." But
I work
I get
with
the sentiment.
yeah, I work with a lot of kind of journalist photographers. They all talk about you've got to be ready when the guy dies. That is,
Uh,
so many of them have had that exact same sentiment where it's like they need to make sure that somebody passes away and they were on tour with that guy in 1986, that they can pull that image, which is a very strange thing that 3 different journalist-esque photographers have told me.
well, I guess we are now our own photo editors and catalogists, catalogers. I'm not sure, as compared to when we just had shoe boxes full of negatives. So that makes sense. That's not me, but again, I get it. Just to be clear, you had mentioned something about a drive dying and still being able to have all of that data. This is because it holds multiple hard drives in it, right? Like it's a box that holds multiple hard drives.
Yeah, and so for people who have ever used a Drobo before, back before they went under, it was very, very, very similar, where you basically have a box that's just got a bunch of slots in it, and you can just plug in hard drives into those slots, and then it does some magic stuff. And now all that data is kind of spread out amongst all those hard drives. And it's all kind of, whenever you're reading a file, you actually get much better speeds out of it because now you're not reading from one hard drive, you're reading from 6, however many you end up having on that. And so that's one of the things a NAS can do, though actually what's called a DAS is direct attached storage, like the Drobos and the external SSDs and stuff. You can actually get those that are little RAID boxes that give you that same capability. Though since Drobo went under, I've not found any ones that make really good, reliable ones anymore.
I'm not kidding you when I tell you that I searched for weeks looking for one. And unless I wanted to Frankenstein my own box to do it myself, I didn't see any good options that offered any sort of flexibility. And that's ultimately why I decided to go with the Synology. My biggest thing was I am worried about editing, say, 4K footage off of it over Wi-Fi, and you had made a video on how to directly connect it over 10 gig to your computer via Thunderbolt. And I was just like, well, that's easy enough. That is as close to direct attached storage as I think I'm going to get. And because of that video, I gotta say, I've been relatively happy with it. There are obviously still growing pains from the Drobo from just how easy it was. But overall, there's a lot more flexibility, which has been great. And having one place, as you mentioned, to know that I can put all of my photos and files and just know that they're taken care of and not have to worry about what drive is it on and all the stuff. And it takes care of all that stuff automatically has been huge because on top of that, as you mentioned, if one drive fills up, what do? You just buy another drive, and then that sucks because now you have to transfer all that data over. But with a NAS, you can just pop out the smallest drive, put in a larger drive, and now your data pool is much larger. You have access to more storage without really having to do much. And that flexibility is amazing because that's the thing. I mean, you just showed me 3 SSDs in your hand right there. If you fill those up and you got to keep figuring out which one is which, that is annoying. I'd rather be out there shooting than figuring out where the photo of that guy who just died is,
Yeah.
So it's great.
And that's actually one piece of advice I do want to give anybody who's kind of starting to go down that NAS route is really, at all costs, avoid buying just a 2-bay NAS. So NASs are sold in a number of bays is the easiest way that they're kind of differentiated. And that's just the amount of hard drives that they can fit. I really do not recommend people ever buy a 2-bay NAS unless they really know they're never going to need more space. Because now, especially if you're using that redundancy, it's generally a redundancy where any one hard drive can fail of the group. So if you've got 2 drives, that's half your space gone. If you've got 4 drives, that's 25% of your space gone. So you can have 3 times as much space in a 4-bay NAS than a 2-bay NAS. And the other thing is, so many photographers go, well, right now I've got 8 terabytes. So I'll go ahead and just get 2 16 terabyte hard drives to get 16 terabytes usable space. And so quickly you start filling it up. So it's so nice. A lot of them, what they'll allow you to do is you can just put in 2 drives in a 4-bay NAS. And then when that time inevitably comes where you're at 80% full, you're like, I really need some more space. You just slot in another drive and just expand it out. And a couple of days later, you've just got more space.
Because the other option would be now you have to buy 2 larger drives if you had the 2-bay.
Yeah. Or a new NAS. And it just gets where your investment, it's so nice being able to just kind of grow that investment. And normally it's $100 difference. And it just is the difference in lasting you an extra 5 years in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Okay, well, that's a good point. Let's continue to talk about cost here because maybe I might be a unique use case here compared to most beginners, but because my Drobo had 5 bays, I went ahead and bought is it the 922? The DS 922?
923 or 1522.
Okay, it's the 9, no, wait.
5 bays or 4?
No, I'm embarrassing. It's 5. It's 5.
Okay, 1522.
There you go. That's the one that I bought. Yeah.
I think I've got one right there. I constantly have them running in this house. It's very odd.
You're like, how many do I have? So I bought that, and it was so hard for me at first, I think, to buy it because it was like $700 and there's no storage. I also had to bring over the drives. On top of, I went extra and did the SSDs for read-write cache as well as upgraded the RAM and bought the 10 gig network card. And then, of course, the Thunderbolt connection for it as well. I went extra. So for all of those people who are thinking, if I just want to get into this, I got to spend $700 on a box that holds 5 hard drives, and now I have to bring 5 hard drives into this. Tell me who that makes sense for and who it does not, because I'm sure that there are going to be people who that does not and will never make sense for.
Yeah, and that's just where there's a high upfront cost as well as a high learning curve. Both of those things make it a large, where it's not just, as much as I'd love to, a NAS is not for everybody. It really is not. And so many people can have years of photos and have a great time without ever having to go that next step with the full NAS. But really who it's there for are the people who are having to work between multiple editors. You can start having one shooter and they can just upload files to NAS and everybody's working on them at the same time and being able to access them from multiple devices. It's the ability to be able to access them wherever in the world. So instead of having to carry around your entire photo catalog on an external hard drive and hoping that it doesn't get lost with your bag, it's just there. I work with a lot of photographers in setting up their NASs, and it's great where you can set up automatic backup. So when they are traveling, their computer, those raw files are being saved over to the NAS just in case the computer doesn't come back with them for whatever reason. And that flexibility where you're able to do so much more is where the real value in it comes in, because it goes from being, oh, it's just an external hard drive, to being an entire new computer that can do things that your computer just cannot do.
Another thing now that I think about it is that with a computer, people typically upgrade that, let's just say 4 years, 3-4 years or something like that. With a NAS being a computer as well, is that something that we're going to have to upgrade on a similar cycle?
I mean, honestly, like 8 years, it comes down to it. That's why I actually kind of try to get people to buy at least the 4-bay NAS, is because you don't have to upgrade the hardware. As long as you've got enough hard drive bays, it is so easy to be able to keep that thing going for years and years and years. I meet with people all the time who have units from 2014. It's like, wow, how is this thing still running? And it's like running an entire business. It's like, all right, well, I mean, if it keeps plugging along and it works for you. And that's just where it comes down to a much shorter or much longer investment than something like a computer that you are going to have to upgrade.
I see. Yeah, that was one of the things for me. I ended up choosing, when I bought a laptop, I was now able to purchase less storage on the internal laptop because I knew that I had a large amount of external storage that I could use. And honestly, with how much Apple charges for storage, it kind of paid for itself. If I wanted 4 terabytes of storage inside of my MacBook here, I don't know what that would have cost,
I
$1,500 or something like that.
I think
Ridiculous.
it's $1,000 upcharge
Oh
for
my
four
gosh.
terabytes of space, which is just insane,
Yeah.
just absolutely nuts. And that's where you start looking at those other costs, and that's where it's like, okay, yeah, that's a lot cheaper. And for those people who are looking for that massive amount of space and being able to carry around just their laptop anymore.
Yeah, exactly. While it does seem like a huge investment to get started, I think the way that I justified it is that I was using it in a business setting, right? Like I didn't have multiple shooters, I didn't have multiple people editing off of my drive. But for me, the knowledge of knowing that all of my stuff was in one spot and that I didn't have to fragment, on top of that, knowing that all of this stuff was important to other people and that I could now get away with having less storage inside of the computers that I do upgrade, it did make sense financially for me, even though it wasn't fun to hit buy. When you see that hit your credit card, that is never fun. At the end of the day, the peace of mind I have found worth it. But it sounds to me like what we're kind of ending with here is that a NAS isn't necessarily for everybody. It is for those who need it, but figuring out what the right solution for you is what's most important. Is that right?
I completely agree. And that's where a lot of what I frame it in is if you are somebody who's really into computers and you can figure that kind of stuff out, then it can be a great option. But genuinely, as much as I love the things, if you're just not somebody who really gets computers, and it's honestly going to cause you more stress than it's probably going to help you out, because that's all it is it's a tool to do additional things and be able to have a workflow. I know a lot of phenomenal photographers who have their workflow and they're not changing it one bit, and they're going to take unbelievable images off of whatever hard drive they're going to stick them to. They've got a great system where everything's perfectly cataloged and they test it every year. But it just comes down to what is going to make sense for your workflow and how comfortable you are with these kinds of things.
I don't know how to end it any better than that, Will. That was perfect because I know that, again, this can be a world that is confusing. There's lots of numbers and there's new terms, and it can be confusing for those who are trying to learn all the new numbers and words within photography itself. So having this whole other thing is a lot. So again, I appreciate you coming on today. For those who are interested in learning more about maybe their options when it comes to data management, specifically within a NAS, if they're looking to purchase their own, where should we learn more about you?
Make a ton of tutorials on YouTube on space Rex. Just type space Rex and photography, and you'll find a bunch of stuff.
I just want to give a big thank you to Will for coming on the podcast and sharing everything that he did. Now, as promised, I'm going to share with you how to start to implement some of what Will shared with us today. But first, I had 2 big takeaways from today's episode. The first one is just that your work needs to be protected. We have this idea that once we dump our photos onto the computer, well, then they're good. There's nothing else that we can do with them. But in fact, that's when they're most vulnerable. You're moving your computer around, you have other stuff on your computer. They're very easy to delete. If, somebody steals your computer, if there's a power outage, like all those photos could be gone in an instant. You worked hard to capture those photos. Work hard to protect them as well. Takeaway number 2 is just the importance of understanding your needs. Not everybody is going to need a multi-$1,000 RAID setup, but depending on what your goals are and your use of photography, maybe a simple Google Drive backup might be enough, but you need to have something. And lastly, if your head is spinning with everything that you heard today, no worries. What I've done is I created a photo management challenge where I'm going to walk you through how to secure your photos so that you can stop worrying about losing your images to hard drive failure, where you can streamline your collection. I can tell you that there is truly nothing better than having a solid system in place that you know exactly where your photos are when you're looking for them. And trust me, as you grow and you keep shooting, it's only going to become harder and harder to find your photos. So having a streamlined collection is key. And all of this is so that you can preserve your photo legacy, ensuring that your photos stand the test of time. So that if your computer dies, if there's a power surge, if you get robbed, if there's a flood, one of the million things that could happen to your computer and your data, if any of that happens, your photos will be protected. all without the overwhelming and technical jargon that typically goes with it. And all the while, I will be there to answer specific questions and even offer recommendations if you need. So you can join the challenge by coming on into the Beginner Photography Podcast community. If you're not in the community already, you can join the free and private Beginner Photography Podcast community by heading over to beginnerphotopod.com/group right now and make the most out of your winter months. Again, join today, free private community, heading over to beginnerphotopod.com/group. That's it for today. Until next week, remember, the more that you shoot today, the better of a photographer you will be tomorrow. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.